So radical mixed use, radical incrementalism is really predicated upon, a different way of planning, right? That has, I'm hoping that I'm being clear enough here about how one would go about it differently, through trial and error, through testing, rather than necessarily through just, shaving down the shape of what you want. And I think with mixed use, it really ultimately has to be that way, because at least in the way, with the way that urban development works in this country, because the traditional planning tools do not necessarily create the new forms of mixed use or more radical forms of mixed use that need to be explored. All they do is permit it in this completely open way. The big box is connected with, that it's part of anything bigger, could actually be the solution to a lot of their problems, will be the only way that they're actually going to be able to get to build these big boxes on sites that they've had so much opposition to, that they now are in a position of having to consider more radical solutions to. So by inserting myself, or inserting the role of the architect at the crux of the point where the two, there's a confluence of, there's a kind of intersection of opposing positions, but nobody can figure out how to solve the problem. Design actually becomes the thing that's like a key in the lock that opens it up, that allows, those things to engage each other in a kind of productive way. So that's what I mean, that conventional mixed use really hasn't, it's really not, how shall I say it? It's not really the full promise of what mixed use can be. I mean, just having residences over a retail is not the true power, does not tap into the true potential power of what this as a way of thinking could actually unlock for people. I think what it really has to do more with is seeing how not just mixing things, not just simply taking uses like land uses and putting them together, but really thinking in terms of lifestyle and conventions. Let's call it about conventions of using the city, and how the way that we actually how we might be able to actually solve political problems that we got ourselves into because of the modernist separation. My criticism of the new urbanists largely stems from the fact that they that they do not, that their world does not include, for the most part, a lot of these things that really are part of the world, the real world, which is like the big box. For example, is not part of their world. They choose to either exclude it or simply say there shouldn't be big boxes, but there are big boxes. They're there, they exist. And so there's a kind of radical pragmatism that has to come with that, and with the belief that actually you get, that's how the innovation will actually happen. New urbanists would characteristically say, look, the only way you get rid of the big box is to kind of sweep it away to the corners where it has the least detrimental impact, as opposed to seeing it as an economic and a social engine for generating new forms of community. I mean, there are people who are very dedicated to Costco, to Trader Joe's, to Home Depot, who love those places and who would love to live near them. Who go there probably not always because they actually need something, as just the fact that they like being there, every weekend, as hobbyists and so on. And a lot of our big box projects really sought to look at how the branding that was connected with those stores could actually be the honey, that attracted, or the pollen that attracted the bees to it, as opposed to simply a problem that needed to be kind of swept away. Same thing with parking. I mean, the solution is not to vast amounts of parking is not necessarily to, with new urbanists, to literally hide parking structures behind screens, but actually to find ways of actually building them into larger complexes of mixing uses where that actually can be, where the spectacle, like a drive-in, of seeing people drive actually becomes entertaining. My friend Bob Summel likes to call that entertainment planning. He said that, you know, that it's a hybridization of entertainment and planning. You have to think about planning more as a form of creating entertainment rather than simply of, you know, regulation. I guess I am saying, you know, it should certainly be more design driven, but I'm also saying that that I think designers have to also have to involve developers and business plans in thinking about how cities work as a more integral part of that design process as well. I think that we can't just, the problem with the new urbanist transect idea is that of the form-based zoning is that what's wrong about that too is the fact that all it is about is just creating envelopes. And so you can't simply, that's just as bad as a designer saying, I think the city ought to look like this, and not have any idea of how it actually works. So I think it involves, I guess what I'm calling, that entertainment planning idea is really a kind of very refined form of what I would term scripting, which is the idea that planning is also like a form of storytelling. It's about understanding how things work or what life is like, painting a picture of how things will happen, and that what you're actually shaping is not just what things look like, but actually how they're going to unfold. And that design is also, part of the novelty of design is not just making things that look new, but also that work in a new way. And you know, today, of course, there are a lot of things that we do that are in a new way, but you don't see them reflected in the way that the city actually looks. So I'm interested in that kind of transparency and saying that it's a little bit like, you know, Matrix. You know, when you're inside the Matrix, it looks one way, and then finally when they kill the Matrix at the end, you know, they can actually get outside of it and see what the city actually looks like. That I think we're kind of in a bit of a matrix right now, and that if you actually were to look at the city with like an infrared camera and really see how people were using the city, it might suggest some more radical reorganization. So that's where, getting back to the theme of mixed use, that's why you can't simply rely upon old formulas of mixing, of like, you know, mom and pop store underneath the residence.